The final saga. On September 3, 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Among its key provisions, Britain recognized the independence of the United States. The new nation's borders were set broadly, from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River, and from Canada to Spanish Florida. Americans gained fishing rights off Newfoundland and in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Both sides promised to honor debts and respect the property of loyalists, promises often imperfectly kept. The Revolutionary War for Independence was formally over, but the Revolution's broader social and political implications were just beginning. The ideals of the Revolution were debated and contested not only in Congress, but in slave quarters, native councils, and homes. Enslaved people sought to turn the conflict to their advantage. The British governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore, issued a proclamation in November 1775 offering freedom to enslaved men who fled patriot masters and joined the British forces. Thousands did, forming units like the Ethiopian Regiment. In 1779, General Henry Clinton's Phillipsburg Proclamation broadened the promise of liberation to enslaved people of rebel owners throughout the colonies. While many who ran to British lines died of disease, hunger, or were re-enslaved, thousands survived and were evacuated with British forces at war's end. Some ended up as black loyalists in Nova Scotia, London, and eventually in Sierra Leone, where they helped found Freetown in the 1790s. Others remained, often still in bondage, as the new republic expanded slavery westward and southward. Native American nations confronted their own impossible choices. Most Haudenosaunee, Iroquois nations, many Cherokee, and others sided largely with the British, seeing the crown as a lesser threat compared to land-hungry settlers, especially after Britain's proclamation line of 1763 had at least nominally tried to restrict westward expansion. A few native groups allied with the Americans, but overall, indigenous communities paid a terrible price. After independence, the United States largely ignored British promises to protect native lands and pushed west, often by treaty under duress or outright violence. Women sustained farms, shops, and households in the absence of men at war. Some accompanied armies as camp followers, cooking, washing, and nursing. A small number, like Deborah Sampson, even disguised themselves as men to fight. In letters, Abigail Adams urged her husband John in 1776 to remember the ladies when creating new laws, warning that women would not hold themselves bound by laws in which they had no voice. The new constitutions did not heed her fully, but her words foreshadowed later struggles for women's rights. The Revolution widened the space for questioning old hierarchies, but it did not abolish them. Politically, the new United States initially organized under the Articles of Confederation, ratified in 1781. The Articles created a weak central government. Congress could conduct diplomacy, wage war, and manage Western lands, but it lacked power to levy taxes directly or regulate interstate commerce effectively. Each state retained significant sovereignty. Victories like Yorktown had required tight cooperation. In peacetime, centrifugal forces reasserted themselves. Economic turmoil, interstate disputes, and events like Shays' Rebellion, an uprising of indebted farmers in Massachusetts, 1786 to 1787, convinced many leaders that a stronger central framework was necessary. In 1787, delegates met in Philadelphia for what became the Constitutional Convention. They drafted a new U.S. Constitution, establishing a stronger federal government with separate legislative, executive, and judicial branches, a system of checks and balances, a framework for federal and state relations. But the Constitution also embedded compromises over slavery. The 3/5 compromise counted enslaved persons as 3/5 of a person for representation and taxation. The Fugitive Slave Clause required the return of escaped, enslaved people. The transatlantic slave trade was allowed to continue until at least 1808. The document created a durable structure, but at the cost of leaving slavery intact and politically protected. an unresolved contradiction that would shape American history and lead, generations later, to civil war. In 1791, the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, were ratified, guaranteeing freedoms of speech, press, religion, assembly, protections against unreasonable searches, the right to trial by jury, and more. These were not just legal clauses. They were concrete expressions of revolutionary distrust of concentrated power. Between 1775 and 1783, farmers became soldiers, merchants became revolutionaries, and 13 colonies declared themselves states, then bound themselves, uneasily, into a union. The American Revolution did not invent liberty, but it reframed it. From a privilege secured by status and tradition, to a right that governments are meant to protect, drawing legitimacy from the consent of the governed. The new United States was not a finished project in 1783. It was, in many ways, an argument about who counted as the people, what equality meant, and how far liberty should extend. That argument would be refought in courts, in elections, in fields, and in streets, by abolitionists and enslaved people, by women and workers, by native nations and immigrants, by every generation that came after. What began with a shot heard around the world and a declaration in Philadelphia continues wherever the core claim of the revolution is tested and renewed, that government should serve the people, not rule them.